Hey, what's up YouTube? It's Alex at La Salado. So I'm having a pretty bad day today. I done this oil cooler job yesterday on an OM642 engine Sprinter, 2010 Sprinter diesel, and now it's leaking from the bridge between the two manifolds. So I basically have to redo the job again. So I said to myself, maybe I'll take a bit of time, do a little video for other people, see what's going on. I'll show you exactly where it's leaking right now, and then I'll get going on the job. So here guys, it's a beautiful OM642 engine. I've already taken out the inlet pipe for the turbo. Air box is off. I took out the diesel filter because I was looking for the coolant leak, because I saw a big puddle under the coolant under the car after I done the job last night. So I took out the water sensor from the diesel filter, took out the filter, and you got the coolant leaking right in here in this little bridge right here, the little pipe that connects the two manifolds together. I'll shed some light in there for you guys. Light in here. So this little union right here, where you connect the two manifolds, the passenger side and the driver side manifold, there's a little pipe in here with two O-rings, and one of them is leaking. And overnight, basically all the coolant leaked on the floor. So there's not much way to get around this beside tearing everything apart again and redoing the job. So it's exactly what I'm going to do now. So I'll show you my little trickeries I have to try to save some time, and let's see how fast I could do this job. So first of all, take out all the plumbing, take out the piping for the intercooler coming from the turbo, take out the muffler, the air intake resonator. I mean, there's a lot of shit I have to remove, and I don't know if I'll film this whole thing, or maybe I'll stop and take a bit of time to show you what has to be done. But long story short, you have to take out the turbo, take out everything that's under here. I mean, thermostat housing, all the coolant hoses around here. You have to remove this engine cover, take out the fuel line going from the left fuel rail here to the right fuel rail. There's a line right here. This has to come off so we could get under there. I seen guys, they take out both rails. Me, I just take out the passenger rail, take it off the passenger side head, take out the rail completely, then take out the wire harness, or take the wire harness out. I mean, I have to lift it. I don't take it out completely because some connectors are pretty hard to get at, so I usually remove the harness as loose as possible so I could tie wrap it up here, tie wrap it to this bracket or to the wiper linkage, so it gives me some room to work, and then pull out the two manifolds, swap that seal, put everything back in. So it's basically going to be another 10-12 hour job to fix that fucking leaking seal that, you know, I changed the seal when I was there, but for some reason it's leaking. So I don't know if you can see the coolant in there. It's here. Maybe you get to see the little drip. There's a little dripping non-stop, and it's coming from that O-ring on the bridge between the two manifolds. So I'll start tearing some stuff apart, and I'll be back. Here's pretty much all the tools I used. You're gonna use these two sockets, E10, E12. I'd say for 80% of the job, 90% even. I mean, almost all the fasteners on the car are either E10, E12. You have a few Torx, and I don't even think there's a 110 mil I removed. You need the flat blade screwdriver, magnet to catch everything that falls, mirror to see where you're going because there's a lot of hidden bolts and you want to see where you're at. I love this light, put it around my neck or over my head. It helps a lot, keeps my hands free. Here, when you're removing the turbo, when the turbo's been sitting on the car for 10 years, I used the 1/2-inch ratchet. Don't be too scared of wreaking on those bolts. I've never snapped any. They're really tight on there. If you try to get in there with just a regular ratchet, I mean, you need to put a lot of load on there. So I usually use my 1/2-inch ratchet with my adapter and extension, get in there on the E12s, and just reek and pray they don't snap, because if they snap, you're pretty much screwed, because it's very hard to go and drill. First of all, they're so hardened from the heat cycle, and second of all, it's a very awkward position. So, but so far so good. I hadn't never broke any bolts on the turbo, on the manifolds or in the back of the turbo. So just be careful. Make sure you don't strip the head of those e-socket bolts, because if you're not on there properly, if the socket's not in all the way, could round the head off, and then makes it very complicated to remove. Need a cutter for all those fuel line collars, little channel lock. I use the small one. I find it's very handy, easy to get into hard spots to get the hose clamps off. Hose pick, little pick. That's it. So gather all your tools. You need some patience. You're gonna use a lot of gloves. I mean, it's a very dirty job, oily job, oil everywhere, fuel everywhere, and a lot of coffee. You want to get going, keep on going. I like to have my little coffee on my table. So here's the kit I bought. You have the oil cooler kit, seal kit, 524-281 L-ring. And there you have pretty much everything except this gasket. Turbo, not the turbo, the thermostat housing gasket wasn't included with the kit, so I bought one of those. Because when I done the job yesterday and replaced it, you get the intake manifold gasket also wasn't included in the kit, so I got that one. Here's the part number, Mercedes part number, if ever anybody's looking for it. I guess they give you some other ones. I don't know if for another car, maybe this one is the right one. But on this car, this one doesn't fit, so I had to get this one. And in here you have all the O-rings for the water pipe, for the oil cooler, intake pipe. You have some other gaskets that I didn't get to use because I guess they weren't meant for this car. You have the fuel return O-rings there. Here you get the exhaust manifold gasket to turbo gasket. And here you got all the gasket for this is exhaust manifold to downpipe gasket. Underneath right here, this big one with all these holes is the one that on the lower part of the pedestal for the turbo. You got the EGR one in there. I know they give you two of these the top turbo pedestal gasket. This is one I'm going to use. Alright guys, so got a bit of thing going on here. So I took out, started taking out the wire harness. You have the connector for the clutch fan here. You have a few connectors on this side here. This is for the airbox and the MAF sensor. Here you have some running in the back there. There's a sensor there, I guess, on the EGR cooler. Right here, you have a O2 sensor connector here on the firewall. You have another sensor in the back here for diesel, I guess, NOx sensor or something like that. And the back connects to this harness running along the fuel rail, under the fuel rail. Got the bracket off here. I'm going to start pulling out the connectors for the injectors. Then take out the fuel return line on the passenger side. Where is it? So I got the fuel return line coming from this little bracket that's bolted on top of the motor here. Got the fuel return line. These little connectors, you push them down, you pull them up to unlock them, and you pull them off the return pipe on the injectors. Be careful not to break the return pipe on the injector, because it's going to cost you an injector. Be careful not to break these little plastic pieces, because if you break those, you need to buy the new line, because they don't sell these separately. And there, I'll continue tearing some more stuff apart. Guys, I got my buddy holding the camera, Mike, my helper, the best guy in town. So here, take out the fuel rail, get it off from this section, off the crossover pipe over the intake. Sometimes I take these three off, but it's going so easy today that I didn't have to. I just took off on the injector side. Like I said, I done the job 2 days ago, so everything's loose and easy to go. So it's probably going to be very fast for me today. I'll just set this over here for now. So I'll get the crossover pipe off also. I'm guessing now that I'm lucky. Well, lucky, I don't know, I'm lucky. I have to do this job twice, so I'm not really lucky, but there's no fuel leaking. I never started the car. I mean, it started leaking coolant. I saw it right away, so I never even got to run the car. So I mean, there's all the coolant leaked out overnight, so everything's empty. So I'm not making too much of a mess, because this is a pretty messy job usually when you take it off the first time. You get off the crossover pipe, off the middle. Also, there, put in there. Don't forget to drain the coolant. Usually I start with that. Open the petcock on the rad, let it drain. I have the drip pan at the bottom, catching whatever's left of coolant, because like I said, most of the coolant leaked on the floor overnight. So there you go. So I got the fuel rail off on the passenger side. I got my fuel return lines off, diesel filter off, starting to get the wire harness loose, so I could screwdriver lock these little locking tabs here. 1, 2, 3. I guess this must be cam sensor. Get this guy off. Harness loose. So I got, like I said earlier, you got these 2 connectors lying around. Got the ones for the front here, ones for the back. Got the one that goes in the back of the fuel rail, fuel pressure sensor. There's another connector here on the turbo. You gotta take out the connectors off the globe plugs. 1, 2. The one in the back cracked. Pry it up with the screwdriver. The head of it is broken. The tip of the connector. Got this one off. So this all attaches to this loom here that passes under the turbo. So you gotta get this guy out of the way, move it over once the turbo removed to get at the manifolds. Got the vacuum line here from the vacuum pump going to the booster. Squeeze that, get out of the way. Just put it over here. Have to get at the thermostat housing in a minute. And alright, now I guess it's time to attack the turbo. So, connector off the turbo. Alright, so I'll remove the turbo and I'll get back with you guys in a few minutes. I'm back. So the turbo is almost off. I only have a couple of bolts left. I'll just show you quickly what I've done. So here, you got the EGR pipe on the back here. Take out those 2 screws for the EGR pipe. You got a little bracket here holding the EGR pipe to the head. You got to take that bolt out so you're able to push the EGR pipe back so you could get the turbo out of the car. And here, where my my socket and my extension is, right here, down in here. I'll put some lights. You got 2 bolts, one on each side. I left the bolt in there, it's loose now, but let's see if you guys can see this shit. You got 1 bolt here. You got the same one on the other side. Gotta get those 2 out. Down in here you got another one. It's out already. The bracket holding the turbo to the transmission, or the, I guess, the block or the transmission. You got the 3 bolts for the exhaust pipe. The last one down there, the pipe is slotted, so you don't have to remove it completely. And when you're doing this, look, there's this other bolt right next to it. When you're feeling with your hands, because you don't really see anything down there, you have this one here. This is part of the white pipe. You don't want to touch this one, and you don't want to break it either, so don't touch this one. It's right next to it. It's this little guy here. You take this one out. This is one of the 3 bolts holding the down pipe to the turbo. You got the 3 bolts on the white pipe on this side. You got 3 bolts for the other white pipe on the other side. You got to move the EGR pipe to get at one of them. You could see the treads there. Let me see. I can show you with my hands. Get this out of here. I mean, you always need a magnet. I use my magnet all the time here. Look, I put a little piece of paper in my socket. Like that, it prevents the bolt from falling. Keeps it tight in the socket, so when you're pulling it out or putting it in, it actually stays in the socket. So that's a nice little trick. I got my little mirror here. I use this all the time. When I'm looking in the back, I want to see what I'm doing. I get a mirror. I see where the bolts are. Try to figure out what I'm doing. And these lights. Love this light. Neck light, snap-on neck light. Fantastic. It's worth every dollar. So here, you got the white pipe on this side. You got 1 bolt here, 1 bolt there, the other bolt sitting underneath. I mean, if you know what you're doing, if you're doing this job, I'm expecting you to find this bolt without too much difficulty. And then you got the last two here. You got this torque down here, this torque down here. You got to take these two out. When that's out, you put these in first. You take these in last. You take those out last, and you put those in first. These are critical bolts. They're the one that have the feed lines, the oil feed lines going to there. So I definitely want these two bolts to be dead on before I attempt putting anything else, because this piece doesn't move. And once you get these two bolts aligned when you're installing the turbo, you got it going. So start with that, and then like I said, these are my last two bolts left, so I'll take these two out and I'll pull out the turbo in a minute. So these are T45s. Yank it out. You have to kind of rotate it to get it out. I grab it from the back from the white pipe to clear the EGR pipe, and there you go. Here it comes. So here, you got 1, 2, 3 on the white pipe, 1, 2, 3 on the white pipe. You got this bracket mounted to the top of the engine on the block or the bell housing of the transmission, I'm not sure. Like I said earlier, make sure you don't take this one off. You don't want to fight with this one, because the other two are on this side. You'll never get them unless the turbo's off the car. So don't touch this one. It's this one. This one is slotted. The pipe is slotted, so these two have to come out completely. This one you could just back it up, pull the pipe out once you took out the V-band. 2 bolts for the EGR pipe. And the 2 bolts are here for the feed line. Coming from this, I guess, pedestal. You got the gasket on here. Gasket flip on. This is brand new. I just changed it yesterday. I'm going to put a new one in anyways. I'm not going to take the chance to have to do this job 3 times. So I ordered a new oil cooler gasket set, because all the gaskets pretty much that I need are in there. So there you got it. This guy, oil feed line. There's coolant in here. I don't think so. It's pretty much only oil that goes in here. So you got the oil feed line, oil return line. It's all attached to this thing. So it's very important. The gasket, when you put the turbo back on, you want to make sure this gasket is sitting properly. And like I said, that's why you're going to put these 2 bolts in first when you're putting in the turbo, and you're going to take these 2 bolts last when you're removing the turbo. Now I'm going to continue. Like I said earlier, this loom has to come off. There's some bolts here holding it in. I'm going to take out this bolt, and then most of it is loose, so I'm going to be able to hang it on the wiper linkage right here. It's going to give me some room to take out the Swirl flap motors here. That's another little trickery you got to do under there. And then 3 bolts for this inlet pipe coming from the throttle body, like I said earlier. And take out all the bolts on the manifold. And normally the manifold's pretty much going to come off. So usually it takes me 10-12 hours to do this job when everything's seized up in there, because they've been there for years. I mean, like I said, I done it 2 days ago. So everything's coming off really easily today. But normally it's not this easy. I've been at this now for maybe an hour and a half. It's going very well. I got the wire harness loose right now. So you got 1 bolt here. You have 1 in the back here, holding the bracket to the other support bracket. This loom, the threads are on the actual wire loom on this piece here, the black piece. So you have to have the bracket. This goes like this. So you have the brackets in front of this loom. Make sure of that. And here, these 2 bolts. Make sure you don't mix them up, because these bolts are basically holding the manifold down to the head, so you don't want to put the wrong bolts in there, too long, too short. That's going to cause you some issues down the road. So take out this bracket. Add some more connectors here. Connector for the coolant temperature sensor, I guess. You have the other connector for the swirl flap motor, or swirl flap position sensor. And you have some lines here for the glow plugs. Pull these out also. Just so when you have the loom off, it gives you a little more flex on the line. You don't want to crack anything, break any of the connectors. Here, this last one's stuck in there. Oh, there, I got it. So here, my little 12-volt Milwaukee fuel impact drill. I use this guy all the time. I love him. Oh, one last connector here. Screwdriver. Tab up. This. Oh. Release the connector, and then normally. Oh, one last. Just attach the bracket here. Hold this right off the bracket here. And now my loom, I have enough flex here to put this loom up here. Get this out of the way. And see, I made myself a lot of room to get at the manifold. So we're basically there. So I gotta take out swirl motor, swirl flat motor, this pedestal, 4 bolts, Torx, female E12 I guess, 2 here, 2 in the back. Get these 4 bolts out. There's a gasket under there, obviously has to be changed. Even though I just put in new gaskets yesterday, I'm not gonna take the chance to reuse these gaskets that were already crushed once, and then it leaks again, and then I have to go through this thing all over again. So here, let me take out the swirl motor first, and I'll show you the little trick I do to get those little plastic retainers holding the swirl motor to the actual arm actuating the flaps. And we'll see from there. So here I got the swirl motor out. So here you got the one Torx that ties this other lever right here. This guy attaches to this piece here. It's a Torx, I think a T20 or T25, forget. Then you got these little plastic little pieces that go, and the other arm that's here. It's kind of a very stupid design. I can't believe they weren't able to figure something out better than this. So what I do, usually when you take it out, you squeeze these little tabs here. You have to go with a long nose. And you squeeze the tabs, they're kind of sticking out like on this side. You got one right here. So you squeeze the 2 little tabs and you push down on the thing. I mean, a lot of people break these. I try to be careful, and so far I'm pretty good at not breaking them. And they split in 2 pieces. They always split. That's the way they're designed. And when you're trying to put them back together, the 2 pieces, they keep falling left and right. So I just cut myself a little tiny piece of electrical tape, and I tie the bottom. So I keep the 2 pieces together. So I'm pushing back in this little square little thingy there, the actuator, the arm that actuates the flap on the passenger side. I'm actually able to keep everything together, and I just position it. I mean, it's a bit of a pain in the ass, so it's not like it takes me always a few attempts to get it on, but tape the 2 pieces together, a little electrical tape, you could see that at the bottom, and I push the whole assembly up in that little lever, and then I'm going to connect the other piece, which is also a nice little challenge to get everything aligned and get this lever back on the other. You want to get this back together, you have to put this lever on top of the other lever, align everything. Everything's moving around, it's very difficult to get everything aligned. And then when everything seems to be aligned, you go there very, very gently with your Torx screwdriver or Torx socket, whatever you're using, and try not to disturb anything and get it going. And once you grab a few threads, then you could position everything with your hands. You get your hand in there and try to hold everything in position and tighten everything back up. So there you go. So this guy's out. Now I'm pretty much at the point where I'm going to take out this oil feed block for the turbo, take out the 4 bolts on that, and then I'm going to take out the 3 bolts in the front inlet pipe for the manifold, and then all the bolts around intake manifolds. Both manifolds have to come out together because of this little bridge here. It's a very terrible design. That's actually why I'm changing it today. Like I said earlier, there's some dripping coming right from the seal on the passenger side. I don't know if you guys see. It took me at least an hour to figure out where the coolant was leaking from. I was hoping it wasn't from there because I don't want to do the job again, but unfortunately that's where it's leaking, and there's not much else. There's not much other solution than take it all apart again and changing that seal. And to do that, well, you have to pull everything apart again. So I'm going to take out the thermostat housing also, 3 bolts here. This last bolt is very long. It actually holds the manifold to the head, so you want to make sure that you don't want to interchange them, because this one also is long, but if I remember correctly, this one is longer than this one, so try not to mix them up, and that's it. Everything else is pretty straightforward. It's pretty, it's time consuming, especially if you've never done it before. It's a bit of a pain in the ass, but I mean, it's a job you're gonna have to do. If you work on these cars, you work a lot of Sprinters, Mercedes, GLs, MLs with a 3-liter turbo diesel. Usually it leaks oil inside here. I mean, I cleaned everything up the other day when I was in here, changed the 2 seals under the cooler. Today I'm not gonna touch the cooler because I was there before, and I tried to clean it the best I could. I mean, there was oil all the way almost to the top of the cooler. I'm gonna try to upload some pictures when I put the video on YouTube. I'll show you guys how bad there was oil in here, because that's the real reason he was here, because he would drive the car and every time he would park the car there was a huge puddle of oil on the floor. And now, unfortunately, after I do the job, leaking coolant. I'm pretty aggravated with this, but at least it's going well. Got my thermostat housing removed. Now I'm going to start tearing the bolts off for the intake manifolds. I mean, now we're ready to remove the manifolds. We got all the bolts here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's one in the back here. 6, 7, 8. And I guess this one is the 9th one, bolting the manifold to the head. Same thing on the other side. 1, 2, 3. These were for the bracket earlier. I showed you the one that holds the wire loom. The wire loom that goes under the turbo. So you got these 2 bolts with the bracket. 5, 6 in the back, 7, 8, and this one is the 9th one. I got these 3 off from the inlet pipe, and like I said earlier, I'm gonna take all the bolts out and push the manifolds back, lift them up, and take them off the car. And there you got it. So whatever you're doing, if you're doing the oil cooler seal, if you're doing this little bridge pipe, there's 2 O-rings, 1 on each side. This is exactly what happened here. I don't know what happened. I can't wait to see what's going on over there. I hope there's a gash in the O-ring or something, because if not, I really don't understand why it's leaking there. I mean, it's not the first time I do this job. Usually I do it once. This time, unfortunately, I had to do it twice. So let's see what happens. Let me tear these bolts apart, and I'll have somebody hold the camera when I remove the manifolds. I got all the bolts out. Don't forget, you have one super long one here. All these ones, these 2 here are the same length, same as these 2, and this one here on this side. Then you have the short ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, oh, forgot one, 4, 5, 6 in the back here. And then you got these one on top of the left side manifold. Just these 2 are longer, they're a bit longer, but you're supposed to have to remove them before. They're the ones that hold the bracket on. So they're a bit longer than the short ones, because just try not to mix them up. You never know, you could put a long one instead of a short one, crack something inside the head. You don't want that to happen, so try to be careful. Here, let me get the last bolt off. I forgot my little M12. I mean, I tear everything apart with the impact driver, because I know I put everything in yesterday. When you put this back in, mandatory to torque. I torque them 16 Newton meters. Do the conversion in foot-pounds if you have to. Inch-pounds, I use my 1/4 inch torque wrench, so it's I think 140 inch-pounds, 16 Newton meters. Make sure you get this torqued. This is very important. Anything head-related, these bolts, I mean some other stuff you could put in by hand tight, you know, a little snug on the ratchet. Yes. Somebody came and bothered us for a minute, so we're back. So here you got the hose coming for the expansion tank. Oh, right there. So I'll leave it connected to the manifold. The less I remove today, the happier I am. So there you go. The manifolds are loose normally. You should pull off the car. Did I forget one bolt on this side maybe? Oh. These should also be... Oh yeah, there's one left under here, under the fuel lines, right above that coolant pipe. So got one there. there we go. It should be ready to come off. So there you go. 1, 2, these come together. Take them off together, and there they go. Off they come. Get them out of there. Bit of coolant leaking out of there. Where they got caught, something is holding up. Wire harness for the flap. So you're right here. Now let me figure this out. So there you got it. Here's the infamous oil cooler. So this is how you change the oil cooler. Seals, there you have 2 seals under there. I mean, I'm not going to touch it today because like I said, I removed it 2 days ago and the seals were changed, and I don't think that's what's leaking. It was leaking above. See, you have all sorts of coolant around here. It was seeping. What happens on these cars, you have the drain for the V. So a lot of people think it's leaking from the rear main seal, but it's not really the rear main seal leaking. Let me get a screwdriver. I don't think I've ever changed a rear main seal on these engines. What happens, it gets full of oil, in this case coolant today, because of something I done, because I don't really see coolant leaks there very often. It normally leaks oil from the oil cooler. It fills up, I'm telling you, you can't even see the bolts anymore. It gets full of oil, the V, and you got a drain right in here. Look, the screwdriver goes in there. So you got the drain for the V, and it drains in the bell housing, and then you get it all over the place. I mean, this one was leaking so much, there was oil everywhere, but what usually happens is it drains in the bell housing, so people think it's leaking from the rear main seal, but it's not the rear main seal leaking. It's actually this guy, the oil cooler seals. You have 2 H-shaped seals under this oil cooler, one here, and they're the one that they dry up, they leak, and then this thing gets full of oil, leaks from there. You get puddles under the car, on the belly pan, and that's it. This is what has to be done on these engines. So always try to get the heads. I wiped them off the other day when I done the job. I don't use any abrasive on the heads because they're machined here. You could see the machining. I don't like to I don't want to score the head or anything, so I just use a rag with some brake cleaner, get nice and clean, try to get the most crap I could have. I mean, maybe in some case I'll take a little Scotch-Brite, very fine Scotch-Brite, just if there's some crud there that I can't get off with the rag and the brake cleaner, but usually they're pretty clean. You have one seal under here, has to be changed for this inlet pipe. Here you have another seal, it's an O-ring that's actually on the manifold. So everything, all the seals you remove when you're doing this job, I suggest to replace them. So you got the exhaust manifold seals in the back here. On the Y pipe, very well see the Y pipe here now, everything's out. You got the both sides, the exhaust manifold leading to the turbo on both sides. And you got the down pipe going to the cat, EGR valve. Don't forget, you got this little bolt here in the back here on this little bracket right here. You can see that holding the EGR pipe to the head, so you got to get that one off if you want to be able to push the pipe away. When I'm doing the turbo job, you have to push the pipe back to get the turbo off. And don't forget, you remove this bracket here when you're doing the turbo. If you're only doing the turbo and you want to take out the manifold, take out these 2 bolts here with that little bracket. It allows you to rotate the turbo to clear the EGR pipe and the down pipe, because the flange is under here, so you kind of have to rotate the turbo to clear everything. On this side you have a lot more room, so you could rotate it, move the turbo to the driver's side, and pull the turbo as an assembly off the car if you're only replacing the turbo. So it looks pretty overwhelming when you're doing it for the first time. I mean, after you've done a few, they're not that bad. Look, on this side, I don't take anything apart, really. I have a few connectors off, glow plug connectors, and the crossover pipe for the fuel crossover pipe going to the other fuel rail on this side. But most of the stuff you have to remove is on the passenger side. You have to remove a fuel rail, fuel return line, the wire harness like I said. I take all the connectors off on the passenger side, get everything loose, get some slack in the harness, so I'm able to hook the harness up here like that. It's out of the way while I'm doing the job. And here are the manifolds, the infamous exhaust manifolds you have to get at. And this is the one that was leaking. Let's see what happened. There you go. I just figured it out with you guys. Look what happened with the O-ring. When I was putting it in, the O-ring got out of place, and forget it. You would never get this O-ring back with the manifold inside the car. Look, you can see. I'm not very proud of myself, but like, it's part of the game. When you're a mechanic, you always deal with this kind of stuff. The O-ring right there, it's sticking out. It's not in its groove. I'm gonna take this little, let me take the bridge off the manifold. Look what happened. Right here, you got it. So, the O-ring got pinched. You can see there's a gap there. Look, here it's nice in the groove. Right here it got pinched. So it wasn't sitting properly. I would have never got this fixed without removing everything off the car. So there you got it. So all this job to change this O-ring, put everything back. Nice waste of time. I wasted a day, but you know, in the end, I'm happy I saw it. It didn't start leaking a few months from now or something, and the customer is pissed off because this is a pricey job. I'm going to charge him, I'd say, at least 12-hour labor for this job, plus all the parts I installed on the car. So definitely going to be I'd say a $2,000 job. So I had to redo this job because of this O-ring. Hey, what can you do? Welcome to the mechanic world. Got the manifold back in. I found a little trick here. It's the first time I do this, but this was actually amazing. I think anybody who does this has to do this. Especially if you're doing it by yourself, and I mean even if you're with someone, I mean it's pretty much a one guy job. And what happens is this bridge in the middle here, where the two manifold connects together, that thing wiggles non-stop, and when you're trying to get the assembly inside the V there, it always keeps falling off, and it's pretty annoying. So what I done here, I zip tied the two intake manifold ports here on the manifolds together. So I put a zip tie around when it was on the floor. I connect the bridge. I made sure the gasket's in properly on both sides of the manifold. I zip tied the bridge, the manifolds together at the bottom. Here I took two screws, two bolts. I put them in here. I zip tied the other end of the manifold here together. So like that, it helps a lot. I mean, it reduces the wiggle between these two manifolds to a lot. It makes it a lot easier, because I'm telling you, when you're trying to put these manifolds in together, I mean, these have to go in simultaneously. You can't put one and then put the other. You have to put both at the same time. And what happens with this bridge here in the middle, especially I lubed the O-rings with some silicone grease, so I mean the bridge keeps getting cocked one side, the other side. I'm sure that's what happened yesterday, because yesterday I did not tie wrap these manifolds together, and it was actually a pretty pain in the ass to get the manifolds in. So what I done, zip tie the bottom of the front of the manifolds together pretty tight with the zip tie, and in the back here I made myself a little rig here. Here also I tie wrap the wire harness so it's not in the way, because what happens a lot of time when you're installing the manifold, the wire gets behind the manifold on the head side, and then it gets pinched in there, and it makes your life a lot more complicated. So zip tied the three wires together, the two wires for the intake flaps and the coolant hose. I mean, honestly, you could probably remove the hose. I'm just too lazy to remove the hose off the thermostat housing, but it's like one clamp right here. Oop, take it off, throw it away, put it back when it's time. I mean, I don't know why I didn't bother doing that. But anyways, I got the two wires zip tied together with the hose as an assembly. So I keep them in the middle of the two manifolds so they're out of the way. And right here I took two screws out of the jar, put one in here, one there. I joined them together with the zip tie. I made a little loop here to make sure that the zip tie wouldn't fall off this bolt because it's in an angle. So I just have this hand tight here. And there you go. I popped the manifold in. I got 1, 2, 3, 4 manifold bolts in right now. They're just hand tight, but everything's in place. I mean, the bridge, if this bridge isn't sealed properly now with these two O-rings, I mean, I'm gonna have to shoot myself. because I don't see how this O-ring could be out of place right now. I'm still gonna triple check with the mirror and the camera, everything, because honestly this is the first time this happens to me, but you saw what happened. The O-ring got pinched when I installed the manifold yesterday, and it was leaking coolant and I had to do the job over again. So it's worth to take the extra 5 minutes, make sure you got everything right here. So here I'm gonna start putting some bolts in, start hand tightening them. Like I said, these mandatory torque wrench. I mean, if you don't have a torque wrench, I don't know what to say. You could go by hand. I mean, it's probably been done. I'm sure some people in Russia do that shit. But, I mean, I have access to a torque wrench, 60 Newton meters. If Google converted properly, that's 140 inch-pounds. And that's exactly what I'm going to torque it to, my manifold, to the head. I think it's pretty important, and I'm going to go around the bolts at least 2 times to make sure they're all torqued properly. So I'm going to hand tight everything. First step, second step, I'm going to torque everything, and then I'm going to go around again, make sure everything's torquing. You're going to see this little bridge here, the gap's going to open between the 2 manifolds when everything gets torqued down, and hopefully that O-ring is sitting properly and I won't have any more coolant leak, because that was a real bummer. Alright guys, so I got the manifold back in. As you can see, the gap for the bridge here, it opened up. I mean, I went in there the best I could see. I mean, it's very hard to see in there. I check with the camera, I check with the mirror to see if the gasket's in properly. I mean, I have to cross my fingers. Maybe I'm going to put some coolant in here through this little port just to make sure nothing's dripping, because, I mean, this is what made me do this job again. You have the short bolts. So there's basically 3 bolts holding the manifold, 3 types of bolt. There's your short ones, the medium ones, and the long ones. And there's one super long one that goes here, but this one we're going to put on after because we have to put on the thermostat housing, and this basically clamps the thermostat housing to the manifold and then goes inside the head. So this is a super long bolt. So when you take the bolts off the manifold, after you've taken this one out already, you're going to have the short ones. All these top bolts on the right side are short bolts. Then you have the 2 in the back here, one here, one at the bottom here. Those are also short. And then you have long ones here, 1, 2 long. On the left side, you have medium bolts in the back. They're basically the same length of these 2 bolts holding the bracket. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 medium bolts. Then you have short bolts here, 1, 2, and this one under the fuel line here, or above the port for the coolant on the left side manifold. This one right here, that's a short. And then you got 1, 2, 3 long. So 1, 2, 3 long on this side, 1, 2, 3 short on this side, and 1, 2, 3, 4 medium ones on this side. The 4 in the back, 2 in the back, 2 for the bracket, 3 shorts here. So just try not to mix them up. Here you have the super long one for the manifold here. Super long. And you have 2 short ones, one right here and one's under the manifold. You don't really see it, but it's there. It's a triangular shape port, so get all those in. I mean, I tighten the manifold everywhere before I tighten anything of this. So I'm gonna go up and torque my manifold down 16 Newton meters and go from there. Alright boys, so I got the flat motor inside. And don't forget what I said earlier about these little arms under here. I have this little piece of electrical tape holding the 2 little tabs together that fall apart. When you take out the motor, you're gonna have 2 pieces. They're gonna fall on the cooler. You're gonna have to pick them up. Then you put them back on the motor, on the little pivot there, the little, I don't know, let's call it a little joint there, where it pivots. You're gonna tape them together with a little tiny, you know, little fucking 1/8 little slit of electrical tape. If you put too much in there, you'll never get the piece in the arm that actually actuates the flap inside the intake. And in the back here, you got little torques here. It's pretty tricky. I mean, if you do it with the pedestal there, it's a real pain in the ass because you have no room to get your hands in there. So what I usually do, I'm gonna go in there with my left hand, hold this assembly up, try to align everything. With my right hand, I'm gonna put in the Torx hand tight, and then I'll go in there with my screwdriver, tighten everything up. There you go, got it back in. It took me about 3 minutes. I mean, It's a little tricky, but if you get the trick, it's not that complicated. Put the 2 bolts in there. I put back my thermostat housing here. I'm gonna tighten this hose, put a regular collet clamp. It's easier to get at than to actually put the spring clamp that was there from the factory, so I put a regular collet clamp here. I'm gonna go and tighten this one, slide it in. You know what I thought? I'm gonna put some coolant in there in the next 5 minutes, so like that, if ever I see it leaking, I'll catch it before I put everything back. If ever this gasket's not in properly, at least I'm still there and there's not that much work to be done. So I'm gonna go and connect this coolant hose back. I'm gonna put the pedestal in the back. I mean, I see coolant in this one of the holes there. I know it's blocked off. It's not going to the turbo, but I don't know if maybe it's a port on the inside the motor and inside the block, and on some other cars it actually feeds coolant to the engine. So I don't want to start pouring coolant inside the car and then it starts gushing out of there. So I'll put the pedestal in there to make sure it blocks off that hole. The one right here, the back here. This one right here, there's some coolant inside. I mean, I went in there with a screwdriver. It didn't seem like it went all the way down, but I don't know if it just filled from coolant from all the coolant leaking, or there's actually connects to coolant port inside the motor. I don't want to take a chance. It's already a mess enough on my floor, so I'll put the pedestal in there with the gasket, and then I'll connect the hoses, and normally I should be able to fill in the coolant because I don't think there's anything else related to coolant that's disconnected. So I'm going to be able to fill up the system because, like I said the other night, last night when I finished the job, I just filled in the coolant before I left, and when I came this morning, I mean, the whole system emptied on the floor. There was a huge puddle under this truck, and it's still there actually. See, I didn't pick it up. I was too lazy, so it leaked all the way to the back, all the way to the lift. I mean, under the car, it's loaded with coolant. I'm gonna have to clean up the floor when I'm done this job. So that's it. I mean, it doesn't need any pressure where it was leaking from. It just, the gasket was pinched and it was just dripping constantly, and I guess it's a matter of minutes once this port gets filled with coolant. If ever it wants to leak, it's gonna leak. So here I got the pedestal ready to go in. I put in the gasket on the dowels. Like I said, this port, I'm not sure if it actually feeds coolant. I know this car doesn't, this port doesn't feed coolant to the turbo. Maybe on some other car it does, so I prefer putting the pedestal in there before I actually fill up the coolant to make sure there's no leaks. And I just don't want it to make it more of a mess than it already is in my shop right now. So there, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to drop the camera because it's pretty hard to put the pedestal in while I'm holding the camera. I'll put the pedestal in, I'll tighten it down, and then I'll fill up the coolant, see what happens. So here guys, I took a little break, made sure nothing was leaking over here. Seems to be good this time. Nothing under here, seems pretty dry. I don't feel any coolant. Nice and dry under this bridge here. So I went up and while I was waiting to make sure nothing was leaking, I put in the bracket here for the loom. Don't forget, you got the bolt in the back here. The loom actually goes behind this bracket. Don't forget to plug in the, I don't know if you can see it here, the glow plug harness, because I had it disconnected earlier. You got the glow plug harness here. You got one in the back of the bracket. Don't forget to connect that one before you put everything back. And that's it. Now it's time, I guess, to put the turbo on, and we'll see from there. Alright guys, so I got the turbo in. It's not bolted yet, but I just put it in place. I made sure with my mirror all the holes are aligning. So here you got this gasket that goes under the turbo over the pedestal, so it's between the turbo and the pedestal. This actually clips on with these little tabs on each side. These clip on the turbo, so it holds it in place while you're installing it. You got the EGR pipe gasket that goes in the back. What I usually do, I'm going to put the 2 screws and tighten the gasket. The gasket's in there right now. At some point I'm going to, when I get the white pipe bolted to the manifold, then I'm going to pull the white pipe, the EGR pipe back to the turbo and drive it in with these 2 little bolts there. So you basically have the 2 little ears on the EGR pipe here. You have the odd shape, that's to put the bolts in through the EGR pipe, and you could actually screw the gasket in so it holds in place while you're doing the job, so it doesn't keep falling off and you try to get the gasket squished in there. And you got the The downpipe gasket, same thing. You have these two little plastic tabs. So install it, you snap the tabs in before you put the turbo on the car, obviously, so the gasket stays in place. Don't forget, you got the one screw, the lower screw for the downpipe. That the downpipe is it's slotted right here. So when this goes on the car like this, the lower bolt is slotted, so you can actually rest the downpipe on the turbo, and then you hand tight the two top screws, and then everything aligns. Don't forget to put the V-band clamp at the bottom to tighten the downpipe to the catalytic converter. Sorry, I'll shed some light in the back. You can see something in here. You got the EGR pipe. Below the EGR pipe, you're gonna see the two bolts. So here you got the EGR pipe there, one white pipe on this side. You see the three bolts there. The holes are aligning. I checked already. Everything's aligning. Like I said, if you get these bolts in here, those two bolts are the first bolts you want to put in. So you're going to put these two bolts in, the T45s in there. Just hand tight them to make sure the turbo is sitting properly at the right spot. And then you're going to go ahead and put everything hand tight. That's how I do it before I tighten everything there. One bolt here, one bolt up there, and one bolt's under the EGR pipe. But if you go with your hand, you're going to feel it. You could pretty much reach in there, everything by hand. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten all that stuff up. Once that's all tight, then you could go ahead and put the downpipe in, and after that put back all the plumbing. Alright guys, so turbo's tight. I tightened everything. I forgot to say, don't forget these bolts for the bracket down there. Wait a second. Follow my ratchet. You got the two bolts here for the bracket, one on each side, with a piece of paper on top of it, because I put a paper in my socket so it keeps the bolt tight in there, and when I put it in, it doesn't fall. And then you got your three bolts for the white pipe on each side. 1, 2, 3. Same shit on this side. One behind the EGR pipe, one under the EGR pipe. And now I'm gonna put the EGR pipe on. I'm probably gonna put the V-band on first, so it's in there. So when I put the downpipe in, the V-band's already there. So EGR pipe is next. After that, downpipe is next step, and then pretty much the turbo's in. You got that little bolt in the back there holding the EGR pipe to the block. I won't lie to you guys, the other day when I done the job, I wasn't able to put it in and I left it out. Maybe I'll attempt to put it in again today. And then I'll continue the wiring, fuel rail, and there we go. It's coming along pretty good. I've been at this now 2.5 hours to take it apart, and I'd say another 3 hours so far I'm in putting it back in. I took maybe a 10-15 minute break, so 2 hours 45 minutes. So far I'm not even in this job 5 hours. I'd say maybe I have an hour left, and it's going really well. Obviously I took the thing apart yesterday, so it makes the job a lot easier. Alright guys, so fuel rail is just sitting there pretty much. I didn't connect any of these lines to injectors yet. I routed the harness. A lot of the harness passes under the fuel rail. We got this part of the harness here. Passes under the fuel rail here. Glow plug connectors. This little bracket goes here. Got the crossover pipe here. Gotta put that guy in first. Connector in the back here, don't forget that one. You got the connector coming from the turbo. You gotta connect this guy. So there you go. Route all your wiring. Put everything loose, you know, the harness is not attached yet. The fuel rail is just sitting there. You got the crossover pipe. Same thing on this side, it's still loose. I just hand tight everything, make sure everything aligns everywhere. Once I'm 100% everything aligned, I start connecting connectors. These are just sitting there just to make sure they're at the right spot, routed properly. And then I'm gonna put the bracket. There's a little bracket goes over here, holds the engine cover, and tighten everything up and move on. So there you got it, guys. Everything's pretty much back up on the car. It took me I'd say about 6 hours to take everything apart, replace the leaking bridge O-rings. I mean, normally you do the oil cooler while you're there. Like I said earlier, I'd done it yesterday. It was leaking from the bridge, so I took some time today to do a video for you guys, show you all the little tricks to make it go faster. I mean, I guess I could do it probably in 8 or 9 hours. Everything off, everything back on. It's a pretty big job. When everything's seized up and the bolts are super tight on the turbo, it's an extra labor, but today it went well because everything was dismantled already. So it was easier to put everything back on. You get a good glance at where everything goes, the bracket holding the inlet pipe. And there you go, man. Hope this thing helped you guys tonight. I was pretty aggravated this morning when I saw the coolant leak, but look, it's part of the game. Now everything seems to be good. It's going to be time to fire it up in a few minutes, and hopefully everything's all good and the truck could leave the shop and move on to the next job. So guys, have a good night. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.